Thank you, Sana, so much for that introduction. And I'd like to thank, before beginning, Professor Sebastia for organizing this conference and inviting me to speak at it, as well as for your help throughout the writing of this paper, including introducing me to the primary and secondary sources that I used for this study. I'd like to start at the outset with a long list, meant to overwhelm. From 1700, the year before the congregation's founding in Constantinople, and when Mkhit was just 25 years old, through the year of his death in 1749, Mkhit oversaw the publication of 55 volumes, 19,300 pages in total, of which 14 were written by himself. The vast majority of these had a spiritual or religious focus, 91%, including many translations of Roman Catholic works from Italian or Latin, but the most enduring contributions were those with an educational focus on language, especially the grammars of Classical Armenian and Modern Armenian, written, as has been said, in Armeno-Turkish, and his magnum opus, a 2-volume dictionary, whose first volume's publication was not completed until 2 months after Mkhit's death, and the second volume was completed 20 years later in 1769. These two types of publications, spiritual and linguistic, comprise the twin foci not only of Mkhit's publishing mission, but of his life mission, and they were interconnected. To work for the enlightenment, spiritual, religious, and intellectual, of the Armenian people, one of whose primary means included educational efforts and increased literacy among the Armenians, with a goal towards raising them to fluency in the classical literary language, Karapar, purified by Mkhit and his followers' own philological endeavors, in order to bring them into contact with the spiritual richness of writings in the literary Armenian language. In my short contribution to understanding the publishing mission of Mkhit of Sebastia, I will focus on the relationship between Mkhit in the role of author, composer, and publisher of texts and his readers. My focus will be on demonstrating some paratextual methods he employed, that is, liminal devices and conventions within a book, such as the use of title pages, prefaces, images, and other introductory matter, as a way of creating and controlling readerly taste. It is Sahak, Djemjemian, and Sebastia, among others, that have done the most to contribute to our general understanding of Mkhit's and Mkhitist publications. Building on the work of these scholars, as well as others, there are two conclusions that can be drawn about the publishing program of Mkhit that contribute to my present study. First, Mkhit had a clearly defined publishing mission, whose primary motive was not profit, but enlightenment, spiritual and linguistic, of his people. Djemjemian encapsulates this in the introduction to his lengthy study, Mkhit Abahor Haradarak Chaganara Kalutuna, Abed Mkhit's publishing mission, from which the title of my paper derives. Even at first glance, it is clearly seen that Mkhit sought neither glory nor material profit. His sole ideal was to come to the help of each child of his people, to teach them their mother tongue, to educate their souls, to lead each one to eternal truths. The enlightenment of my people, a phrase which we often encounter in the writings of Abed Mkhit. Indeed, Mkhit fervently yearned to see his people awakened from their sleep. With clamoring voice, he wanted to teach and to preach to them that there is another life, filled with wisdom and anointed with divine light. Djemjemian, in language that is, albeit reverential, nevertheless captures well the twin foci of Mkhit's publishing mission, education of the Armenian people in both spiritual and linguistic realms. In the year before his death, reflecting on his publishing efforts in a letter addressed to Mahdasi Andreas, one of his congregation residing in Constantinople, Mkhit emphasizes that his publications have been undertaken not for profit, but for the benefit of his people. For we have published and are publishing so many books, not for financial profit, but simply for the help of our people. Among these publications, the deficit of those books which are not able to carry their own cost will be made up for by the books which bring in a little extra. It must be mentioned, of course, that Mkhitar had this luxury because his congregation and their publishing efforts were the beneficiaries of wealthy Port Armenians, whose donations supported the congregation and its book production. The second conclusion is that reader response, whether in the form of positive or negative reception of Mkhitar's publications, he received, in fact, an overwhelmingly positive reception for the majority of the volumes he published, did not have a major impact on Mkhitar's own publishing decisions, although it did for his successors. Aswanian has shown how Mkhitar's successors did respond to the changing taste of their readership by printing books that did not have spirituality as their primary focus. Mkhitar himself seems not to have been as interested in readers' desires, because he was already determined in advance to publish in two very specific realms, spiritual and linguistic. These observations suggest that Mkhitar was less interested in responding to readers' desires than he was in creating readerly taste, in creating a readerly market for the books he published. This was foundational to his goal of enlightening his nation. It was essential to create Armenian readers who consumed and desired books of a spiritual nature, composed in the classical idiom. And now we may move on to attend to various paratextual methods that Mkhitar employed in order to help create a readerly taste that suited that publishing mission. In history of the book scholarship and critical literary theory, paratextuality refers to the way title pages, frontispieces, dedications, epigraphs, prefaces, footnotes, illustrations, and the like work on the perceptions of the reader in advance in order to guide his or her approach to, reading of, and reception of a text, that is, to influence reader response. French literary scholar and structural theorist Gerard Genet was the first to call such devices a work's paratext. He devoted a magisterial monograph to the topic, providing a synchronic inventory of the various types of paratextual devices and defining and discussing their function in shaping a text's reading, reception, and interpretation, complete with a multitude of illustrative examples spanning 3 millennia of literature, from Homer to Proust. The term paratext aptly denotes the way such liminal devices and conventions encircle, frame, and present the text to a reader. In other words, their role of mediation between text and reader. They are, as the French title of Genet's book, Seuil, indicates, thresholds, or vestibules, that offer the would-be reader the opportunity to decide to move onwards and read the book, or step back and put it down, while at the same time guiding his or her posture into an attitude that is proper for entering into the structure that is the book. This threshold is authorial, in that it is connected to the author. It is the author's most immediate, albeit implicit, way of influencing the reader, of guiding his or her interpretation, of attempting to ensure that the reception of the text aligns with the author's intention. It is significant for our purposes here, then, because it is one of the most immediate means whereby an author, composer, publisher, such as Mkhitar, with a distinct mission, was able to wield his authority in relation to his readers, in order to influence their reading of the volumes he published. My assertion, then, is that attention to paratextuality offers valuable hermeneutical insights into both Mkhitar's attitude towards his text, in other words, his intention with how the text was to be read, received, and interpreted, as well as how his original readers, and here primarily I have in mind Mkhitar's students of the congregation, and secondarily any of his contemporaries and immediate successors who read from his published volumes, how they may have felt in relation to the text, how their response and reception was guided by his paratextual devices. Both of these aspects enrich our understanding of Mkhitar and his publishing mission and its wider impact, especially when we lack such information from other sources outside the text, as is often the case for early printed books. Excuse me. Okay, now the pictures. The first two examples are taken from the same book, Mkhitar's 1730 Classical Armenian Grammar, authored by himself, and entitled Grammar of the Classical Language of the Armenian Nation. As the frontispiece indicates, its intended readership was first and foremost those youths who newly came to the congregation and set out at an early age on the grammatical study of the classical language. In regards to the physical appearance of this volume, Djemjemian writes, "From a typographical and artistic viewpoint, this was the most perfect volume of Mkhitar's publications to date. It is therefore unsurprising that in such a volume, where such care was put into the typographical layout, that we find powerful paratextual devices employed by Mkhitar. After the frontispiece, there is a decorative page, adorned with a border of crosses, stars, and ornate lines. Within the border is a central cross on a decorative pedestal, and around the arms of the cross are the congregation's initials, Vo, Gen, Vev, Aib. Underneath the pedestal is a short 4-line poem, which reads, Nach kanes kol ko keragan, es chachanara kez hanaran, zimni usumen kitnagan, ari litsi kez pekatzman. Before your grammatical life, make the cross your support, lest scholarly study become for you an occasion of boasting. This short poem is composed of 4 octosyllabic lines, each of which ends with a trisyllabic word, creating a syllabic line structure of 5 plus 3. Each final word ends with the same syllable, an, resulting in all 4 lines rhyming with one another, along with their identical meter. There is a pronounced use of alliteration, especially the sound k, even more so for speakers of Western Armenian, as the Mkhitarist monks were, since the letters kim and k have been merged into the same sound. After reading it once or twice aloud, it is almost difficult not to remember it, due to its simplicity, symmetry, and catchy alliterative meter and rhyme scheme. Standing as a kind of introit to the study of the grammar of classical Armenian, it confronts the student at the outset with a very clear message. Linguistic study is not an end in itself, but is ancillary to the Christian life. The student's identity as a Mkhitarist Armenian Catholic is visually illustrated by the cross and congregation's initials above the poem, and is verbally engraved into his mind with this concise, memorable poem, even before he begins his scholarly studies. The student is, in a sense, branded, and the purpose and place of his grammatical study is clarified from the outset. This paratextual device then guides his approach to grammatical study, situating it in relation to a higher, more strictly spiritual goal. On page 4 of this same volume, after a short preface, and opposite to the beginning of the grammar proper, is a beautiful copper plate image depicting Catholicos Sahak and Saint Mesrop, commissioner and inventor of the Armenian alphabet. Mesrop is teaching, while Sahak looks on from an episcopal throne. Before them are seated at a long table in learning posture, taking notes with books open before them, the famous disciples of Mesrop, Moses Chorenatzi, David Anhacht, Mambre Verzanoch, Yelishe Bartabed, Razar Parpatzi, Yeznik Kochbatzi, and Asolik, all of them considered renowned authors of the 5th century. This stately image communicates on different levels simultaneously. First, the students of the text are visually reminded that they are setting out to learn the language of these giants of Armenian Christian literature. After their study of the classical grammar, they will be able to commune with these figures through reading their works. Secondly, and more powerfully, a strong parallel is drawn between the situation of the 5th century circle of Mesrop and his students with the 18th century setting of Mkhitar and his own students. The tonsured hair, dress, and young age of the students pictured, their feather pens and books, the furnishings of the room in which they are sitting, all evoke an 18th century setting in a Mkhitarist classroom, much more so than a 5th century scene. The students of Mkhitar's grammar then are identified with the students of Mesrop, which tells them that they are not just to be passive learners and readers of this language, but themselves agents of spiritual, cultural, and literary production, like the 5th century writers pictured. At the same time, of course, this aligns Mesrop, their teacher, with Mkhitar himself, the student's teacher. Meanwhile, the figure of Sahak, seated on his episcopal throne, conjures up more an image of an 18th century Roman pope due to the style of his mitre and vestments than it does an Armenian Catholicos, whether past or contemporary to Mkhitar's time. Hence, as the figure looks on and oversees the work of the teacher with his pupils, the readers are reminded of their existence under the aegis of the Roman Catholic Church. The correlation between the two settings is unmistakable, the one 18th century, the other 5th. The image thus conveys in a very powerful fashion the goals that Mkhitar had for himself and his congregation: to be in continuity, in fact, to duplicate or enact again the mission of Mesrop and his disciples, who shared the same goal of the spiritual enlightenment of the Armenian people by means of translation and diffusion of the Christian tradition through literary production in the classical Armenian language. Through these paratextual methods, the students who use this book are guided at the outset in the way that they are to interpret themselves, the book, and the role it is to have in their life, to prepare them to be like Mesrop students, and the usage to which they will put the knowledge gained from the book, the reading and production of Christian literature in the classical Armenian language, like Mesrop students carried on and enhanced the work of Mesrop. One last example. Another paratextual method discussed in the history of the book scholarship is the use of games, riddles, codes, or other strategies by means of which the reader is compelled to engage more actively with the text than would occur through normal discursive reading. Through such devices, the reader is able to create his or her own meaning, discover a meaning the author intends one to discover, or some combination thereof. Mkhitar also employs devices of this type. In one of his early volumes, Kirk Arakinutian's Book of Virtues, 1721, following the word to the reader, there is a crossword. However, rather than leave readers of the crossword to create their own meaning, and perhaps risk a misreading, Mkhitar provides the key to the crossword on the opposite page. Reading in 4 different directions from the letter Che, positioned in the middle of the crossword, one can find the following 4 versified sentences, printed on the slide here, of 8 syllables each, composed in a very compressed manner. So for example, cross-like life, which I indeed love. The cross that came to us, I submit to it, etc. Mkhitar does not stop with giving the key, however, but continues in further detail. After each verse, he explicates the poetic passage in discursive prose, thereby giving a detailed interpretation of each verse, in order to avoid any possible confusion or misreading that might obtain were the reader to be left to his or her own interpretive devices. So for example, one of these, for the first one, says, after cross-like life, which I indeed love, he says, which is to say, I love that life which is similar to the cross of Christ, through such torments that obtained on behalf of Christ and on behalf of his truth. As if there was any doubt what I meant before. Besides communicating a pious Christian message to the readers at the outset of the book they are to read, which puts them in the right frame of mind for the spiritual topic of the book itself, the crossword and explanation has a powerful performative function. The readers of the text are confronted with the crossword, which it is apparently assumed they will not be able to decipher, at least not in its full complexity on their own. Thus, the author reveals the key, panali, to them, showing them how to decipher the crossword and read the 4 verses through different directions of reading along the cross. Next, each verse is explicated to give its meaning, which in each case has a pious Christian message. Through this successive unfolding of meaning and explanation, the author's authorial position is reinforced as the one who is in a position to explain what the reader cannot figure out on his or her own, thereby earning respect and trust in the eyes of the reader. This puts the reader in a posture of deference towards the author, as one who should be listened to in his discourse on topics that are outside of the reader's grasp. This is a desirable relationship, of course, for an author like Mkhit to establish, whose text, in this case, like so many others, is a pious book that is meant to teach and impress a way of living and thinking upon his readers, one that is imbibed with the inculcation of Christian virtues. Mkhit thus instills an attitude of reception and openness in his readers before they even come to reading the actual text of his book. So finally, and very briefly, Mkhitar's paratext had at least these three functional goals that we could conclude just from these three examples, of which there are many more. First, ensuring that their intellectual study of his students remained ancillary and subservient to their higher spiritual mission. Second, communicating to them their role both as Armenian Catholic monks and also as those who have inherited and will continue Mesrop and his circle's 5th century mission. And third, imposing a certain posture of deference towards the authority of Mkhitar. All three of these effects fostered the production of a readerly taste that aligned with Mkhitar's mission.